Public employee payoff. And no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good. How are you?
Welcome, everybody, to Mark and the Millennials. First up, public employee payoff. But, of course, we want to talk first about domestic travel restrictions on Florida. Believe it or not, the Biden administration is seriously considering imposing domestic travel restrictions on individuals traveling to and from Florida because the Biden administration wants to crack down on those terrible Floridians that might spread the virus because Florida is a free state. And so Maria Bartiromo, of Fox News, interviewed the governor of Florida, Governor DeSantis, who's a rock star and whose state is indeed the freest state in the country, probably right up there with Texas. And she asks him, how would a travel ban affect Florida? And what does it mean? And why is it happening? And so we have a series of clips on this. And here's the first one. Here it is.
If you look, Maria, right now, you hear this debate over schools. Florida schools have been open the whole school year. We have every parent in Florida has the right to send their child to in-person instruction. Every worker has a right to work and earn a living and put food on their table. And every business has a right to operate. And consequently, our state is doing very well compared to these other states in terms of education and economy. But we also have 26 other states in the District of Columbia that have higher per capita COVID mortality than we do. We have 28 states that have higher per capita cases than we do for the bulk of the pandemic. And if you look right now, states that are always held up by people in Biden's administration, like New York, have way higher per capita patients hospitalized for COVID right now. So there's no basis in medical, there's no basis in economics, there's no basis in reality to do this except to punish a state that is doing it better than what his experts have recommended. Biden is a lockdowner, his advisors are lockdowners. Lockdowns don't work. We've demonstrated that. We're not turning back, Maria, and they will not be able to get away with targeting Florida.
So Florida really has proven that lockdowns don't work because Florida, the free state, their schools have been open since September of last year. And they've had a hybrid school system where you can send your child to school full-time, or if you want, you can send your child to school part-time, and then your child can also learn completely remotely if you want them to. It's really up to you. But Florida is a free state. They're saying, hey, it's up to you. You decide whether you want to go to nightclubs or whether or not you want to go to restaurants or whether or not you want to go to the theater or whether or not you just want to walk outside down the street. And you decide whether you want to wear a mask outside or not. Obviously, Florida strongly encourages the wearing of masks indoors. But I was in Florida, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and I can tell you, people weren't wearing masks in many cases in nightclubs and other places where they were drinking and talking to one another. And they made their own decisions, okay? They made their own decisions. But this domestic travel restriction proposal by the Biden administration is totally about control. And it's about penalizing a really good governor because, let's face it, the Democrats are terrified of a DeSantis candidate for president of the United States because he actually can demonstrate and show how well his state has been run relative to other states. So as a result of not locking down Florida, Maria Bartiromo asks Governor DeSantis, well, how is Florida doing, generally speaking, and economically as a result of not doing the lockdown long term, like, let's say, New York and New Jersey and Connecticut? And we have that clip, and here it is.
We had a 25% increase in home sales year over year, 2019 to 2020. If you look at the top 25 places where new home construction is taking place at the highest levels, a plurality of those are in Florida. I think we have 6 or 7 of the communities. The number one place in the country for new home construction by far is the Villages retirement community, which has thrived during the pandemic, even though, of course, seniors are more vulnerable to COVID than the bulk of the population. So we have a lot of great trends. And I would also say, Maria, you have lockdown states that are putting people out of business. We focused on lifting people up, but by doing that, you actually have new entrepreneurs coming to start new ventures. New restaurants are opening in Florida, new hotels.
So yeah, people are moving to Florida, obviously, but they're not just moving there because they're sick and tired of New York and New Jersey, and as well as the Mid-Atlantic region for that matter. They're also moving there to open up businesses, and they're opening up new hotels and new restaurants. And meanwhile, of course, in Manhattan, restaurants, of course, are for the most part closed or very restricted on their opening. And you see that in many parts of the country, primarily, of course, in blue states. And we've talked about this many times. But the difference is now we have a new administration and their whole modus operandi is let's lock down the really open states and let's demonstrate to people that we can. And this is what's really wrong when you give government too much power and you use a health emergency, of course, health emergency, to basically try to make everybody live their lives exactly the same way. Not everybody has the same risks, obviously. The governor just talked about the villages in Florida, of course, which are populated by, I'm not sure how many tens of thousands of retirees, but my understanding it's a massive complex. And there are thousands and thousands of retirees that flock there and move there permanently. And they haven't even had major outbreaks there. They've managed to contain them, Florida has, because they've used common sense and they have really followed the science. Florida is the #1 state per capita of doses administered of the vaccine as well. Think about that. Florida is the #1 state because it's basically no holds barred, right? You let everybody, including CVS and Walgreens and Walmart, hospitals and doctors, you let everybody provide vaccinations if they want to do so. And it's much easier to get a vaccination in a state like Florida than it is in New York, where it's highly political as to who gets the vaccination. And you have to fill out this long online form, which is highly complicated. And of course, look, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. Why shouldn't New York be #1 given how many people have died in the state of New York? So here's Maria Bartiromo. She's like, well, what about the domestic ban on travel? Why? So we have Governor DeSantis, and here it is.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor, we are talking about the potential for a domestic ban on travel. And some people are saying this is a contradiction to what we've been hearing from President Biden because of his open border policy. They are now talking about screening domestic travelers. But the New York Times has reported that illegals are not being screened for COVID at the Texas border. Your reaction to these executive orders?
Of course they're not being screened for COVID at the southern border because this is all political. So he's opening the border. He's letting illegals pour in. They're not doing any COVID tests. They're just coming into the communities. We have no idea what type of COVID or other things that may be carrying, but yet he wants to potentially make you take a test if you just get on an airplane and fly from one American city to the next, or he wants to prevent travel to the state of Florida.
So did you catch that, podcast listeners? So we have Biden, President Biden, who has decided to tell ICE and the border agents to allow people who are trying to cross the border, the southern border from Mexico into Texas, as an example, instructing them to not provide COVID tests and instead relocating them in the middle of the country without any COVID tests whatsoever. Right? These are people that aren't American citizens, while at the same time telling the people in the state of Florida who are trying to travel from Florida to the rest of the country or from the rest of the country to Florida, you can't do that. We might do a travel ban on you unless you have a COVID certificate, unless you get tested, unless you can demonstrate you don't have COVID and that you're not, positive. And because you might infect everybody coming out of Florida since it's a free state. I mean, has there ever been an issue more firmly framed than this, right? Of what the President of the United States and his woke staff think of the American people. The American people are bad, especially those living in Florida, but illegal aliens who are trying to cross into the country, who may have any kind of disease imaginable to mankind and aren't tested for any of them, are relocated into the country, and they are the good people. And that is domestic travel restrictions on Florida. So next up, podcast listeners, Caitlyn Jenner rules out a run for California governor. I know you were relieved. So Caitlyn Jenner rules out a gubernatorial run in California. That's because, of course, Gavin Newsom is likely to be recalled. I believe they now have enough signatures. The question is, have those signatures been verified, and will there be enough on the list to be verified? I think the answer is, without question, yes. But here's what The Hill reports. Reality star Caitlyn Jenner has ruled out the possibility of running for governor of California. Oh, the longtime Republican and former Olympian, it's hard to say, who came out as transgender in 2015, has been touted among GOP groups as a possible candidate in the increasingly liberal state where Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom is facing a recall effort. However, Jenner's manager, Sophia Hutchins, shut down the rumor mill in a Thursday statement to Politico. Caitlyn is not running for governor, has never considered running for governor, and is very happy doing the work that she is doing to promote LGBT rights and spending time with her 18 grandchildren, 10 children, Hutchins said. I had no idea she had 18 grandchildren. The 71-year-old, who won a gold medal in the decathlon at the 1976 Olympics, has been politically active for several years. Jenner previously said fans used to approach her after speaking events and tell her that she should run for office. In 2017, she admitted considering a Senate run, but never ended up launching a challenge against Democrat Senator Dianne Feinstein. The Keeping Up with a Kardashian star was an initial supporter of former President Trump during his 2016 bid, something she faced a backlash for within the LGBT community. However, she emerged as a frequent critic of his ban on transgender people serving in the U.S. military. Believing that I could work with Trump and his administration to support our community was a mistake, Jenner said. She wrote in a scathing 2018 opinion, "I do not support Trump. I must learn from my mistakes and move forward." So I guess California will be spared a Caitlyn Jenner governor, although I have to admit, it's a lost opportunity because it would be kind of funny to have Caitlyn Jenner as governor of California. It would be quite representative of what that state has become. And I don't know, just be kind of all around kind of funny, you know? I mean, the race, the idea of a race too is kind of funny too, because here's a former decathlon Olympian, gold medal Olympian, right? Running, of course, for office. Something funny about that. So next up, podcast listeners, Dallas Maverick reverses their decision to play the national anthem. So think about this for a moment. The Dallas Mavericks decided not to play the national anthem at their basketball games. And so the decision was made by their owner, Mark Cuban, who, of course, in an interview acts like he's really confused. Like, yeah, you know, it's not a big deal. I didn't really know, but I did know, and we just didn't think anyone noticed, so therefore we didn't play it. So we have ESPN's Rachel Nichols interviewing Mark Cuban about the issue. We have a series of clips on this. You have to really listen to Mark Cuban because he is such a tool. So first up, we have the first clip, and here it is.
First, we're always talking to our community. I mean, that's something Sense stands for and is very insistent upon and has become a core part of who we are at the Dallas Mavericks. And in listening to the community, there were quite a few people that voiced their concerns, or really their fears that the national anthem and did not fully represent them, that their voices were not being heard. And so we've had a lot of conversations about whether or not we should play the anthem. And so during the first preseason game, we decided to not play it and just see what the response was, knowing that we were going to have ongoing conversations about it.
That's because the national anthem is a unifying song, right? It is unifying to play the national anthem before any major sports event, or, of course, any kind of patriotic event that you want to play it at. Normally you would play it because it unifies people. It brings them together. That is a good thing. But apparently Mark Cuban doesn't really understand that. And so he further explains himself to Rachel Nichols of ESPN. And we have that second clip, and here it is.
We didn't make any decision to never play the national anthem. That wasn't the case at all. We didn't cancel the national anthem. We still had our flag flying proud and up on the wall at the American Airlines Center, and everybody had the opportunity to address it and pray to it or salute to it or whatever their feelings are. And we, as the games went by, honestly, we we kept on talking about what we were going to do at some point. But obviously it came to the head when it was reported that at one of our games that we hadn't played it. But, the bottom line.
So that's Mark Cuban, of course, explaining himself. If you notice, his tail is between his legs there, and he's trying to explain very carefully why he didn't play it. But then meanwhile, he gets caught from not playing. And he's like, well, I mean, we didn't actually decide, we weren't trying to cancel it. Well, that's exactly what you were doing. You didn't play it. If you didn't play it, you were trying to cancel it. And look, in the broader context of the Chinese involvement in Major League Sports, especially the NBA, it sure makes you wonder, right? It sure makes you wonder to what extent owners like Mark Cuban, who really seem to care only about the dollar and not about necessarily what's patriotic and what is unifying and trying to bring us together despite what he may say, it sure makes you wonder how much he's being leveraged by the Chinese government. Because of all of the Chinese money that is involved in the NBA, without question. And so here's Rachel Nichols of ESPN, okay, ESPN. And so she says to Mark Cuban, what about your decision once people noticed it wasn't being played? You noticed that it wasn't being played. People noticed it wasn't being played. So when did you decide, finally that it made sense versus before? What's changed? And we have that clip, and here it is.
And then what were the conversations you had over the past 24 hours since it came into the news that you guys had not been playing it, since someone noticed, frankly, and started asking about it? What was the back and forth between you and the league office?
None really. I mean, I talked some to Adam and got his feedback and gave him my feedback that, we had people who were upset by it and were passionate in them being upset. And we had people that fully supported it. That, a lot of people said that they don't understand why, the anthem is played prior to a game. Others said, it shouldn't be played prior to the game. Others said it didn't represent them and they're concerned about being played and it made them uncomfortable. And we talked about all the different feedback that we had received.
So, basically we listened to what people had to say, and it wasn't so important to us that we just do the right thing from the outset. We just wanted to make sure that people were okay with us kickstarting, playing the national anthem once again at the Mavericks games, because, it's one of those things we could just do without if we really wanted to, because it's divisive. It's divisive. So this is what is really wrong, of course, today in sports. It's one of the reasons why I really just have no interest in watching the NBA, at least at this particular point in time, because some of the owners, like, of course, Mark Cuban, have lost their minds. They've lost their minds as it relates to just common sense. Let's walk through this for a moment. So let's say you're Mark Cuban, you play the national anthem, and you have 10,000 people who email you and call you and say, why did you play the national anthem? I want you to play the black national anthem, like they did at the Super Bowl. And I think you have a responsibility to say, because this is the United States of America, and we believe that the national anthem is a unifying song, and we've always played it before the games. And in fact, many times we have members of the military coming, and they are playing the actual national anthem, and there's usually an individual singing it, and we honor them. So why would we just discontinue that all of a sudden? How are you aggrieved, right? But of course, we can't have that conversation because Mark Cuban really kind of vacillates back and forth. Well, we didn't play it, and then we did play it because, people said, why aren't you playing it? And I didn't really think anybody noticed, so what's the big deal? That's basically Mark Cuban putting money ahead of his country. And this is the country that's given him all of this opportunity to become phenomenally wealthy, and he just doesn't care, right? He spent 4 years complaining about Donald Trump, about how Donald Trump didn't know how to articulate a sentence, and Donald Trump was anti-American, and he wasn't unifying, and he was anti-immigrant. And then here you have this guy who basically is anti-American because he won't even play the national anthem. And that's Dallas Maverick reverses decision to play the national anthem. So next up, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, talks about transgenders and sports. That's right, Psaki on transgenders and sports. So we have a number of clips on this issue. Of course, you've heard this before, right? With Title IX, why should men who, for whatever reason, decide that they are going to identify as a woman, why should they be permitted in high school to compete in women's sports? Why should that be allowed? Okay, so, what could go wrong? Well, we've seen a lot of situations where women's sports, of course, have been, quite frankly, completely and utterly upended because of the fact that you have these young men who are, 15, 16, 17, I presume, who are either running track or they're, playing field hockey. Name the sport, maybe women's basketball. And they are basically skewing the statistics and making it unfair for women to properly place in their sports, in their counties and in their schools and in their conference, which of course goes to whether or not they get a college scholarship. So we have Senator Rand Paul. He questions Miguel Cardona. Okay, so Miguel Cardona is Joe Biden's cabinet pick for Secretary of Education. And so we have a clip where Senator Paul, asks Miguel Cardona about this very issue. And so you'll love the response. We have that clip, and here it is.
Do you think it's fair to have boys running in the girls' track meet?
I think it's the legal responsibility of schools to provide opportunities for students to participate in activities, and this includes students who are transgender.
It's important to have opportunities for those students. Okay, so what does that mean? You have to unpack that, right? Opportunities for these students. So why would the opportunity be that you would allow a biological man to race with biological women? It seems patently unfair. So then Jen Psaki was asked at the White House, and I gotta tell you, she's so snippy. She's like that person that you would love to be your ex-wife. That's always the way I've seen her. She just seems like a really nasty person. And it's just kind of her way or the highway. She doesn't like questions that in any way challenge what she believes or what the administration believes. And then you can just tell because she has complete vitriol for those reporters who ask those types of questions. So here's a White House press corps question for Psaki on this very issue. We have that clip, and here it is.
Secondly, on President Biden's transgender rights executive action, specifically when it applies to high school sports. What message would the White House have for trans girls and cis girls who may end up competing against each other and sparking some lawsuits and some concern among parents? So does the administration have guidance for schools on dealing with disputes arising over trans girls competing against and with cis girls?
I'm not sure what your question is.
The president's executive order has...
I'm familiar with the order, but what was your question about it?
My question is, does the president have a message for local school officials on dealing with these kind of disputes that are already starting to arise between trans girls who are competing and cis girls in a level playing field, particularly in high school sports when it leads to college scholarships? Is there any kind of messaging or clarification that the White House wants to give on the executive order?
I would just say that the president's belief is that trans rights are human rights, and that's why he signed that executive order. And in terms of the determinations by universities and colleges, I would certainly defer to them.
So come on. I mean, what a complete idiot for not wanting to answer really the basic question, which is, what about, that was the question, what about, Jen Psaki, the administration's position on the idea of women who, under Title IX, want opportunities to get scholarships to sports in college from high school. And meanwhile, they have someone who is a trans. What is a cis, by the way? It's like there's the trans. So the cis is like the actual biological woman. So I'm learning new things. And what is the idea of a trans being able to, trans individual running in, let's say, a track race and denying that opportunity? And of course, Jen Psaki is like, well, I mean, we just think we would defer to the colleges to make that decision. So what does that mean? Does it mean the colleges are going to now give Title IX scholarships to men? I mean, that's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. So why would anyone put up with this? Okay. And increasingly, what's happening in the United States is parents of these young women who are athletes are fed up. And these normally are very tolerant parents, by the way, very tolerant. they in no way, shape, or form think that these individuals who are identifying, of course, as a man or a woman, they're okay with it, right? But what they're not okay with is the idea of them competing with biological women. And so it's really interesting. So this is a classic example of the progressive left pushing up against common sense, because it is. They're completely and utterly pushing up against common sense, and they're alienating an entire section of the United States, primarily in suburbia, right? So remember who won the last election for Joe Biden. It was suburban women. And suburban women were incredibly taken aback by Donald Trump's demeanor. And so now we have suburban women going, well, wait a minute. Who did we elect here? We got this guy who's in charge, and he's basically saying, including his White House press secretary, that it's okay for biological men to deny biological women the opportunity to have sports scholarships. Now, you've heard this talked about many times before, but the difference is, I think the difference is that they're trying to normalize this kind of behavior, right? They're trying to normalize it at younger and younger ages, including not just in high school, but of course, in some cases, middle school and elementary school. And it just makes no sense. I mean, look, what kind of an individual anyway, who is truly stable, thinks it's normal to run in an all-girls race, let's say, in the 400-meter run, okay? So 400 meters, once around the track, and you sprint around the track once as fast as you possibly can. And let's say there are 5 women, and there's one man who's a trans female. And so, I mean, then he wins, okay? And he wins easily. And so what kind of gratification is that? I mean, I just don't understand. For me, I just see it as a mental health issue. I really do. I do, because I don't understand why you would think that would be okay to win that race and then to gloat afterwards going, I won the race, where's my medal? It just seems patently unfair to the women, but Joe Biden seems to be okay with it. And Miguel Cardona, Biden's pick for Secretary of Education, apparently he thinks it's okay too. So we have a glimpse into what's going to happen when the Biden administration gets its cabinet picks in place finally, especially for education, without question. And it's going to be interesting in what direction they take America. I mean, I just hope that increasingly people realize the need to have school choice, to get out of these failed public schools and this woke system where anything goes that actually is contrary to common sense. And that's Pisaki on Transgenders in Sports. So next up, podcast listeners, CDC says schools can open. So then why are they closed? So the Center for Disease Control says that schools can open, yet they're still closed. Why? So Chris Wallace of Fox News Sunday interviewed the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky. We have a series of clips on that, as well as Jen Psaki talking about opening up schools. I mean, once again, you will really know what the payoff is for the teachers' unions when you really listen to this series of clips, because it really speaks to what people really think about your children. So first up, here's Chris Wallace interviewing CDC Director Rochelle Walensky. Here's the clip.
Doctor, as I understand these new CDC guidelines, if you have proper mitigation in place, even in communities with high transmission, some students can go back to school at least some of the time for in-person instruction. Is that correct?
Good morning. Good to be back with you. In fact, that is correct. So even in the areas of the highest community spread, we are advocating with the strict mitigation measures that you described, including universal and mandatory masking, as well as 6 foot of distancing, that at least our K to 5 children should be able to get back to school, at least in a hybrid mode.
So look, at least, she says, up to K to 5 should be back in school at a minimum in a hybrid mode, which means part in class and part, of course, remote. So this is the CDC obviously trying to open the door and encourage school districts to open. So Chris Wallace has a follow-up question. He says, so why are schools closed then? Why are they like completely and utterly closed other than for learning via Zoom? And we have that clip with the CDC director, and here it is.
Given your CDC guidelines, if you have proper mitigation in place, is there any reason why a public school district needs to shut down for the better part of a year?
So we need to make sure that the K-5 schools and the density is down. And part of the reason they haven't been able to open is because we hadn't previously had the science in order to inform how to open safely. We didn't have the data. And prior, we didn't have any guidance as to how to do it safely. So we are really anticipating that with this guidance emerging, that schools will be able to start opening.
So yes, so they didn't have, according to the CDC director, they didn't have the science, they didn't have the data to determine, look, the data has been available for a long time. Alex Berenson has actually had this data for many, many months and has been talking for many, many months and has been shut down, by the way, by the big tech companies in talking about why children should be back in school. So, of course, the final question from Chris Wallace to the director of the CDC, Rochelle Walensky, is, well, what about just vaccinating teachers first and that solves the problem? And so we have that clip, interestingly, and here it is.
Science. President Biden, since the campaign, has talked about we're going to follow the science. But 11 days ago, you were speaking at a formal briefing, and you said that teachers do not have to be vaccinated for schools to reopen. And after you said that, the White House said, not so fast. Take a look, Doctor.
Safe reopening does not suggest that teachers need to be vaccinated in order to reopen safely.
Dr. Walensky spoke to this in her personal capacity. Obviously, she's the head of the CDC, but we're going to wait for the final guidance to come out.
When you're speaking in public, since you took this role and you were speaking there as a CDC director, are you ever speaking in your personal capacity? And is it clear now that when teachers' unions insist and continue to insist that all teachers, all staff must be vaccinated before any schools can reopen, that that's not based on science?
You know, here's what I will say. My goal is to make sure that the guidance got out. The guidance has gotten out, and it was released on Friday. And the guidance does specifically say that there are many mitigation strategies that are layered mitigation strategies that are necessary to reopen. There are also additional mitigation strategies, such as teacher vaccination.
So that's Director Rochelle Walensky talking about, of course, opening up schools, including guidance that's been in place, by the way, podcast listeners, for quite some time, which says that it's not necessary that teachers be vaccinated first in order to be back in the classroom and teaching. It's not necessary. What does that mean? It means that schools should be open. But according to Jen Psaki, of course, the President Biden's press secretary, Psaki says, well, Director Rochelle Walensky of the CDC, she was just talking on her own time. It was like off record. It wasn't really on the record of CDC. Why does this matter, podcast listeners? It matters because the people who are driving the Biden administration, and the Biden administration is driving the CDC, it's the teachers' unions, right? It's really the teachers' unions who are driving the Biden administration. So to prove it, here's Jen Psaki on the Biden plan to reopen schools. Listen how long it's going to take them to open up the schools. And ask yourself, why? We have that clip, and here it is.
Okay. And then you mentioned the sort of goal of opening up schools swiftly and safely.
Mm-hmm.
Could you help us understand what the White House is, or what the president's definition of open schools is? Does it mean teachers in classroom teaching students in classroom, or does it just mean kids in classroom with a remote screen? Help us understand.
Sure. His goal that he set is to have the majority of schools, so more than 50%, open by day 100 of his presidency. And that means some teaching in classrooms. So at least one day a week. Hopefully it's more. And obviously it is as much as is safe in each school and local district.
When you say some teaching, you didn't use the same majority qualifier there. You just have to have some teaching in school, some teachers in school, not the majority of teachers in school and the majority of classrooms.
Well, teaching at least one day a week in the majority of schools by day 100.
Okay, and that's in-person teaching?
In-person teaching, yes.
So by day 100, that means that puts us at the summer break, right? So, by day 100, 1 hour of in-class instruction, well, that's stupid, right? Because you're going to actually spend all this money picking children up by bus and taking them to their schools so that they can learn for 1 hour in the classroom by day 100. And then by day 100, we're going to be in the summer break. That's the whole plan, podcast listeners, of the teachers union. Their whole plan is to, the teachers unions, by the way, not the rank and file teachers, want to make this clear. The teachers unions are all about not working. They don't care about your children. And so, proof be told, so in the Wall Street Journal, there's an article, it's entitled, it's an opinion article, Public Employee Unions Are Having a Fine Old Lockdown. Politicians begging Washington for a bailout have been doling out raises to government workers. This was just a couple of days ago. And so here's what it says. So as part of his proposed $1.9 trillion relief bill, President Biden wants to send $350 billion in unrestricted cash to state and local governments to fill their budget holes. In other words, encouraging more bad behavior by the blue states. But while COVID-19 has depressed state tax revenue, the prospect of federal aid has encouraged many of these supposedly blameless states to keep piling on the costs and the spending. Nowhere has this been more evident than with the pay raises dished out in recent months to government employees. As private businesses hold on by their fingernails, public sector labor unions have their hands out, demanding the pay raises set forth in labor contracts negotiated before the pandemic ravaged public finances. In Connecticut, for example, where unemployment was 8% in December after topping 10% in the summer, state workers have pocketed 2 rounds of raises, a 3.5% bump in July, and another worth about 2% earlier this month. Governor Ned Lamont had initially suggested postponing the raises to lead by example, but the labor unions, 1199 SEIU, blitzed the airwaves with television commercials accusing unnamed politicians of wanting to take away their wages. So the governor folded. In December, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan let planned a 2% raise continue, claiming revenues have improved enough for us to be able to fulfill our commitment to state employees. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo used special powers to postpone certain planned hikes for state employees. But Mr. Cuomo has indicated he'll use federal aid to pay those raises retroactively and let others continue outright. Most New York school districts went ahead with raises this summer. So the article continues. You can imagine it just goes from one blue state to another and literally talks about how the public employee unions, of course, which the teachers unions are very much central to, and of course state workers as well, because teachers, they tend to be county workers and or state workers depending on the state, and also the state workers who work in the, of course, the bureaucracy. All of these individuals, in many cases, have received raises while these states are showing that they are in the red, that they don't have enough money coming in to even cover their budgets. So the Biden administration wants to give them $350 billion, the states, of unrestricted cash. You can do with it whatever you want to be able to plug those holes and do what? Transfer $350 billion of federal tax money to the public employee unions like the teachers when they're not even in the classroom. This is just so incredibly disgusting. I cannot understand how anyone would think this is okay. I mean, it's just the most disgusting thing ever. So, if that isn't enough, Rob Schneider, of course, the former Saturday Night Live actor, he said there's a new kind of child abuse, and that is, and he retweets a video on extreme COVID measures in school. So here's what it says. Former Saturday Night Live actor Rob Schneider seemingly denounced extreme COVID-19 safety protocols in schools as a taxpayer-funded form of child abuse. In a tweet on Saturday, the Grown Ups actor shared a video from an elementary school classroom showing rows of desks surrounded by plexiglass. Yeah, I've seen this before too. This is bad. Forest Brook Elementary teacher Teresa Holmes recorded a video of her classroom, which has 28 desks now armed with plexiglass shields, said the Twitter account. We are witnessing a new kind of child abuse bought and paid for with your tax dollars, responded Schneider. The collapse of public schools who follow this example will surely follow. History will not look back at this kindly. And so the teachers' unions, despite the fact that the desks are surrounded by plexiglass, that kids have to be extremely socially distanced, that they have to wear masks, despite all of these protocols put in place, the teachers' unions don't want to go back to school and teach. They want to keep their members home. And I want to say it again, not the rank and file teachers, the teachers' unions. And in some cases they're saying, well, we don't just want one vaccine. We want, both vaccines. We want both doses before we go back to school. In other cases, they're saying, well, even if we are vaccinated, we don't think we should be back to school completely, maybe just part-time. And meanwhile, the CDC completely disagrees and says, look, it's time to get the kids back into school. Of course, any parent that's out there, you know what I'm saying is true, because you're thinking to yourself, how much damage is being done to my children as a result of them not having social interaction with other children, not being involved in sports, not being able to be in the classroom and learning in person, and just not having the normal social experience that kids need in order to be able to be mentally healthy. Just kind of common sense. So we can only hope that the Biden administration at some point, because that's what it's going to take, it's also going to take governors, naturally, to step in to shut down the teachers' unions. But I don't really see that happening in the blue states. I really don't. And even governors like Larry Hogan of the blue state of Maryland, Larry Hogan being a Republican in name only, I mean, he's not going to do anything either. He's just like, well, we need to reopen schools, but he's not willing to take the next step, which is to do something draconian to the teachers union to make them pay for what they're doing to the children. And that is, CDC says schools can open, so why are they closed? And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. I want to thank our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler one day when it's back open, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.